A black nurse took care of an old billionaire in nursing home. Later, she discovered something shocking. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the manicured gardens of Crestview Manor. Inside, the nursing home was a world of polished surfaces and muted conversations, a stark contrast to the vibrant life outside. Tasha Lee adjusted the collar of her crisp white scrubs as she stepped into the main hallway, her heart set on her evening rounds. The gentle hum of an old ceiling fan accompanied the soft sounds of residents shuffling in their rooms, some chatting quietly, others lost in their thoughts. Crestview Manor was known for its opulence, a sprawling estate that catered to the wealthy elderly. It boasted a staff of well-trained professionals, gourmet meals, and even a small library with leather-bound books. Tasha loved her job, despite the challenges. She felt a deep sense of responsibility towards her patients, many of whom had fascinating stories and rich histories. Every day, she entered this gilded cage with the hope of making a difference, even if it was just a small one. But as she passed by the grand parlor, where the residents gathered for evening tea, Tasha felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine tea and freshly baked cookies, but it was the unspoken tension that made her uneasy. Little did she know, this night would bring more challenges than she ever anticipated. "Hey, Tasha!" called out her colleague, Marcus, as he stepped out of the staff break room. His face lit up with a friendly smile, but Tasha could see the fatigue behind his eyes. The demands of the job weighed heavily on them all. "Hey, Marcus, just starting my rounds," she replied, forcing a bright smile. The two exchanged a knowing glance that spoke volumes about the long hours they endured. "Good luck with the usuals. I think Mr. Price is in one of his moods again," Marcus warned, shaking his head with a mix of amusement and concern. Tasha suppressed a sigh. Leonard Price was one of the nursing home's most prominent residents, an octogenarian billionaire with a reputation for being both charming and tyrannical. While he could be engaging and witty, he often lashed out unexpectedly, especially when he felt his authority was challenged. Tasha had learned to navigate his moods carefully, offering him the respect he demanded while maintaining her own boundaries. "I'll handle him," she said, her voice steady, though a hint of trepidation crept into her mind. "Just be careful," Marcus cautioned, a glimmer of worry in his eyes. "He's got a way of making you feel small." With that, Tasha continued down the corridor, her footsteps echoing softly against the marble tiles. As she approached Leonard's room, she took a moment to gather her thoughts. She had always prided herself on her ability to connect with her patients, to see them as more than just their wealth or status. But Leonard was a different beast altogether. Tasha knocked lightly on the door and waited for the familiar, gruff response. "Come in!" The voice was rich and commanding, laced with authority. Tasha opened the door, stepping into the tastefully decorated room. Leonard sat in a plush armchair, his silver hair gleaming in the soft light, a book resting on his lap. Behind him, a large window framed the twilight sky, which painted the world in shades of purple and gold. "Ah, Tasha. Right on time," Leonard beamed, his tone suddenly warm. "I was just reading about the stock market. You know, the only thing more treacherous than the tumultuous world of investments is the healthcare system." Tasha smiled politely, though she felt a flicker of unease. "Good evening, Mr. Price. How are you feeling today?" "Ah, feeling? That's a subjective concept, my dear," he replied, waving his hand dismissively. "What I feel is the constant weight of this place, like a ship anchored in a storm. I'd rather be on the open sea, battling the waves." "Perhaps we can get you outside for some fresh air tomorrow," Tasha suggested, trying to steer the conversation toward something uplifting. Tomorrow? Ha! You young people have no concept of time. Tomorrow may never come. Leonard's voice rose slightly, but Tasha could sense the underlying humor. She decided to play along. Then let's make today count, shall we? Tasha said, her tone upbeat. She began to check his vitals, her hands steady as she moved through the routine. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that Leonard was watching her with more than just casual interest. His eyes, sharp and calculating, seemed to analyze every move she made. Tasha focused on her tasks, but a strange sense of foreboding crept into her thoughts. After finishing Leonard's checkup, Tasha prepared to leave, but something in the corner of the room caught her eye. An ornate bedside table stood against the wall, its polished surface gleaming. She had always tidied up the room, but had never noticed the slight gap in the wood beneath the surface. Mr. Price, do you mind if I take a look at that? Tasha asked, pointing to the table. Look at what, my dear? He replied, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. Just the drawer. It seems a bit out of place, Tasha said, her curiosity piqued. Leonard hesitated, his expression shifting to one of guardedness. It's just some old papers, best left untouched. But Tasha's instincts told her otherwise. She gently pulled the drawer open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a stack of documents, yellowed with age and filled with faded newspaper clippings. Her heart raced as she lifted the papers, sensing that she was about to uncover something significant. Mr. Price, what is this? Tasha questioned, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Leonard's demeanor shifted instantly. Put those down! You have no right to pry into my affairs! Tasha froze, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. She glanced at the clippings, her pulse quickening as she recognized a name. Someone she had lost long ago. A friend who died in a tragic accident, linked to one of Leonard's factories. What is this? She repeated, her voice firmer now. These are people, lives lost due to negligence. Enough! Leonard thundered, his voice booming through the room. You think you know what you're dealing with, but you have no idea. Put it back and leave. In that moment, Tasha felt the ground shift beneath her. The documents were a window into a dark past, a past that Leonard had clearly worked hard to bury. She could feel the weight of her friend's memory pressing down on her, urging her to take action. What happened to them, Mr. Price? Do you think this is just going to disappear because you say so? Tasha demanded, her voice trembling with anger and resolve. Leonard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You have no idea who you're threatening. I built this place. I have the means to make sure you regret this. Tasha's heart raced as she considered her next move. She could walk away, protect herself, and avoid the storm that was brewing, or she could confront the truth and risk everything. The choice loomed before her like a dark cloud, heavy with consequence. With a deep breath, Tasha made her decision. I'm not afraid of you, Leonard. I'm going to find out the truth. You can't silence me. As she backed away, clutching the documents tightly to her chest, she could feel the tension crackling in the air. Leonard's expression darkened, his facade of charm slipping away to reveal the dangerous man beneath. Remember this moment, Tasha. You've made a grave mistake, Leonard hissed, his voice low and threatening. As she stepped out of the room, Tasha's mind raced. She had stumbled upon something that could change everything, and she felt a mix of fear and determination surge within her. The stakes had just been raised, and she was now caught in a web of darkness that threatened to ensnare her. Tasha's heart pounded against her ribs as she hurried down the hushed hallway, the incriminating documents clutched tightly in her hand. The opulent surroundings of Crestview Manor, once a symbol of comfort and care, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping her in a web of secrets and lies. The soft glow of the evening lamps cast long shadows that danced on the polished marble floors, mirroring the unease swirling within her. She ducked into the deserted staff break room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a stark contrast to the muted elegance of the resident areas. The stale smell of instant coffee and disinfectant hung in the air, a familiar scent that usually brought a sense of normalcy. But tonight, nothing felt normal. Tasha sank onto a worn vinyl chair, the documents spread out on the table before her, each headline a stark reminder of the lives lost, the injustice buried beneath years of silence and complicity. The articles detailed a series of industrial accidents, each one tragically claiming lives. Faulty equipment, ignored safety regulations, and a pattern of cover-ups pointed directly to Leonard Price's companies. But the name that jumped out at her, the one that sent a shiver down her spine, was Samuel "Sammy" Jones. Sammy, her childhood friend, her confidant, her almost lover. He had died in one of Price's factories, a victim of the very negligence detailed in these brittle, yellowed clippings. The official report had ruled it an accident, a tragic but unavoidable incident. But now, staring at the evidence laid bare before her, Tasha knew the truth. Sammy's death wasn't an accident. It was a sacrifice on the altar of Leonard Price's greed. Tears welled in Tasha's eyes, blurring the ink on the aged newsprint. Grief, long suppressed, surged through her, a tidal wave of sorrow and anger. She remembered Sammy's infectious laugh, his unwavering optimism, his dreams of a future they would build together, a future stolen by a man who valued profit over human life. A sudden clatter from the doorway startled Tasha. It was Brenda, a fellow nurse, her eyes wide with surprise. "Tasha, what are you doing here? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tasha quickly gathered the documents, clutching them to her chest. "Just catching my breath," she stammered, her voice shaky. Brenda's brow furrowed with concern. "You sure? You look pale. What's that you're holding?" Tasha hesitated, torn between her need for secrecy and her desperate desire to share the burden of her discovery. Brenda was a trusted colleague, a kind soul who always offered a listening ear. But could she trust her with this explosive information? "It's nothing," Tasha mumbled, forcing a weak smile. "Just some old paperwork." Brenda didn't look convinced. "Tasha, you can talk to me. Whatever it is, it's written all over your face." Tasha's resolve crumbled. She needed someone to talk to, someone to help her process the enormity of what she had found. She gestured for Brenda to sit down, and in hushed tones, she recounted her discovery. The hidden compartment, the incriminating documents, and the gut-wrenching realization that Leonard Price was responsible for Sammy's death. As Tasha spoke, Brenda's expression morphed from concern to disbelief to outright horror. "Oh my God, Tasha, this is huge. Are you sure?" Tasha nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sure. It's all there, in black and white." Brenda reached across the table and squeezed Tasha's hand. "What are you going to do?" The question hung heavy in the air, a daunting challenge that Tasha hadn't yet fully considered. She knew she couldn't simply ignore what she had found. She owed it to Sammy, to all the victims of Leonard Price's greed, to seek justice. But the thought of confronting a man with such power and influence terrified her. "I don't know," Tasha whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what to do." Brenda's voice was soft but firm. "You have to do something, Tasha. You can't let him get away with this." Tasha knew Brenda was right, but what could she do? Going to the police seemed futile. Leonard Price had enough money and influence to bury any investigation, and going public with the information could put her job, her reputation, even her life at risk. "I'm scared, Brenda," Tasha confessed, her voice trembling. "He threatened me. He said he'd make me regret it if I interfered." Brenda's eyes flashed with anger. "That bastard! He can't get away with this. We won't let him." A spark of hope flickered within Tasha. "We?" Brenda nodded, her expression resolute. "We. I'm with you, Tasha. We'll figure this out together." The weight on Tasha's chest eased slightly. She wasn't alone. She had an ally, someone who believed her, someone who was willing to stand by her side. Together, they would find a way to bring Leonard Price to justice. "Thank you, Brenda," Tasha said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Brenda squeezed her hand again. "We'll take this one step at a time. First, we need to make copies of those documents. We need evidence that can't be destroyed." Tasha nodded, a renewed sense of purpose filling her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she couldn't back down now. She had a responsibility to uncover the truth, to expose Leonard Price's crimes, and to finally get justice for Sammy. The fight had just begun. The hum of the copy machine in the administrative office filled the otherwise silent night at Crestview Manor. Tasha and Brenda worked quickly, their movements precise and efficient, the weight of their clandestine operation pressing down on them. Each whir of the machine felt like a small victory, solidifying the evidence against Leonard Price, piece by piece. The fluorescent lights of the office cast a sterile glow on their faces, highlighting the determination etched in their expressions. With the documents safely copied and stashed away in Brenda's locker, a temporary sanctuary from prying eyes, a new wave of anxiety washed over Tasha. Confronting Leonard was a daunting prospect, a David and Goliath scenario where the odds were stacked heavily against her. She needed a strategy, a plan of action that wouldn't immediately expose her to Leonard's wrath. "I need to talk to someone who knows the law," Tasha murmured, pacing the small break room. "Someone who can tell me what my options are." Brenda nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "I know a lawyer, Sarah Jenkins. She's sharp, discreet, and she owes me a favor." A glimmer of hope sparked in Tasha's eyes. "Do you think she'd be willing to help?" "I'm sure of it," Brenda replied, pulling out her phone. "Let me give her a call." The hushed conversation with Sarah, punctuated by Brenda's reassuring murmurs, filled Tasha with a mix of anticipation and dread. Meeting with a lawyer felt like crossing a threshold, a commitment to a path she wasn't entirely sure she was ready to take. But she knew she couldn't turn back. She owed it to Sammy, to herself, to see this through. The next morning, the air at Crestview Manor was thick with a tension Tasha couldn't quite explain. The usual routines felt strained, the polite conversations forced. Leonard Price was nowhere to be seen, and his absence felt more ominous than reassuring. Every creak of the floorboards, every hushed whisper, seemed to amplify her anxiety. Tasha spent the morning in a haze, her mind racing with possible scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. She imagined Leonard's lawyers descending on her, stripping her of her job, her reputation, her livelihood. She envisioned him using his vast wealth and influence to silence her, to bury the truth once more. The fear was a suffocating presence, threatening to consume her. Finally, the time came for her meeting with Sarah Jenkins. Tasha left Crestview Manor with a sense of trepidation, the crisp autumn air a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere within those opulent walls. The drive to Sarah's office was a blur of anxious thoughts and frantic attempts to compose herself. Sarah's office was a small, unassuming space in a nondescript building downtown. The stark contrast to the grandeur of Crestview Manor was almost jarring. But the warmth of Sarah's greeting, her calm demeanor, and the genuine concern in her eyes put Tasha at ease. As Tasha recounted her story, laying out the documents on Sarah's desk, the lawyer listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. The silence in the small office was punctuated only by the rustle of paper and the occasional tap of Sarah's pen against her notepad. When Tasha finished, Sarah leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the documents spread before her. "This is serious, Tasha. Very serious." Tasha's heart sank. She knew it was serious, but hearing it, confirmed by a legal professional, made it all the more real, all the more terrifying. "What can I do?" Tasha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah took a deep breath. "You have a few options. You can go to the police, but as you said, Price has a lot of influence. There's a chance they won't take this seriously, or that he'll find a way to bury the investigation." Tasha nodded, her fears confirmed. "What else?" "You can go to the media," Sarah continued. "That would certainly bring attention to the case, but it would also put you in the spotlight. Price could retaliate, and he wouldn't hesitate to use his resources to discredit you." Tasha shuddered at the thought. She wasn't prepared to become a public figure, to have her life dissected and scrutinized by the media. "Is there another way?" she asked, her voice laced with desperation. Sarah's expression softened. "There's a third option. We could leak the information anonymously. It would still expose Price, but it would protect you from direct retaliation." Tasha considered this option, weighing the risks and benefits. It wouldn't be as satisfying as seeing Leonard brought to justice face to face, but it would protect her from his wrath, and it would still achieve her ultimate goal, exposing the truth and honoring Sammy's memory. I think that's the best option," Tasha said, her voice gaining a newfound strength. Sarah nodded. "I agree. It's the safest way to proceed. I have a contact at a local news station, someone I trust. I can reach out to him, see if he's interested in the story." A wave of relief washed over Tasha. Finally, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. She wasn't alone. She had Brenda, she had Sarah, and together, they would find a way to bring Leonard Price's crimes to light. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since discovering the hidden documents, Tasha felt a flicker of optimism. She would get justice for Sammy. She would expose the truth, no matter the cost. With a deep breath, Tasha Lee stepped back into Crestview Manor, her heart still racing from her meeting with Sarah Jenkins. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind, a mixture of reassurance and dread. She had a plan, but the enormity of what lay ahead felt heavier than ever. Would leaking the information anonymously truly protect her, or would it only serve to fan the flames of Leonard Price's wrath? As Tasha made her way through the nursing home's grand entrance, The familiar scents of jasmine and polished wood enveloped her. Yet the comfort of familiarity felt distant. The walls seemed to close in around her, the laughter and chatter of residents blending into a distant hum. She couldn't shake the feeling that Leonard was watching her, that he somehow knew what she was planning. "Hey, Tasha!" Brenda called out from across the foyer, her voice cutting through Tasha's swirling thoughts. "How did it go, sir?" "It went well," Tasha replied, forcing a smile as she approached her friend. "Sarah thinks we should leak the information anonymously to a journalist she knows." Brenda's eyes widened, a mix of excitement and concern flashing across her face. "That sounds promising. Are you ready for it?" "I think so," Tasha said, though uncertainty gnawed at her insides. "It's the best option, but I can't help but feel anxious about it." Brenda placed a reassuring hand on Tasha's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. We'll get through this together." The two women exchanged a determined nod before Tasha headed toward the nursing station to check in with her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson. The air was thick with the usual bustle of nurses and aides moving about, tending to residents. But Tasha felt out of place, as if she were an intruder in a world that no longer felt safe. "Tasha, how are you holding up?" Mrs. Henderson asked, glancing up from her paperwork. The concern in her eyes was genuine, and Tasha appreciated it, even if she felt like she had to maintain a facade of normalcy. "I'm good, just a bit tired," Tasha replied, avoiding the urge to share her troubling thoughts. "Long shifts can wear anyone down," Mrs. Henderson said, her tone maternal. "Make sure you take care of yourself." "I will," Tasha promised, forcing a smile before moving on to her rounds. She needed to focus on her patients, to immerse herself in their needs, if only to distract from the chaos brewing in her own life. As she entered the first room, Tasha was greeted by the warm smile of Mrs. Davis, a sweet elderly woman with a penchant for storytelling. "Ah, Tasha, my favorite nurse," Mrs. Davis exclaimed, her frail hands clasped in delight. Tasha felt a swell of affection for the woman, her heart warming at the sight of her bright eyes. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Davis. How are you feeling today?" "Much better, dear. I was just telling my friend here about the time I danced with Frank Sinatra," she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Tasha chuckled, settling into the familiar rhythm of the visit. Mrs. Davis's stories, though often exaggerated, provided a comforting distraction from her turmoil. As Tasha listened, she felt the weight of her worries lift, if only for a moment. She tended to Mrs. Davis's needs, checking her vitals and ensuring she was comfortable, relishing the simplicity of their interaction. But as her rounds continued, the burden of her secret loomed larger. Each resident she visited reminded her of why she was fighting. Each smile and laugh underscored the importance of her mission. She couldn't let Leonard's past remain buried. These were real lives affected by his greed, and Tasha felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility to protect them. By the time her shift ended, Tasha was physically exhausted, but her mind raced with thoughts of the next steps. She and Brenda had agreed to meet at a local cafe after work to discuss the plan for contacting the journalist. Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of something powerful yet dangerous. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, the world felt different. The colors of the sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues, but Tasha felt no joy in the beauty. Instead, she was consumed by anticipation, a storm brewing beneath the surface. She climbed into her car and drove to the cafe, the familiar streets blurring past her, her thoughts spiraling. The cafe was small and cozy, with the rich aroma of coffee wafting through the air. Tasha spotted Brenda seated at a corner table, her fingers nervously tapping against her cup. As Tasha approached, Brenda looked up, her expression shifting from concern to determination. "You ready for this?" Brenda asked, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Tasha took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be. I can't shake the feeling that we're in over our heads." Brenda nodded, her eyes serious. "I get it. But we have to do this. We owe it to Sammy and everyone else affected by his negligence." Tasha nodded, the fire of resolve igniting within her once more. "You're right. Let's do it." They spent the next hour discussing their strategy, going over the details of what they wanted to communicate to the journalist. Tasha felt a sense of camaraderie with Brenda, their shared purpose binding them together in a way she hadn't anticipated. They were no longer just colleagues. They were allies in a battle against injustice. Once they had formulated a clear plan, Tasha pulled out her phone, her hands trembling slightly. "Okay, let's do this." Brenda leaned closer, her eyes fixed on the screen. "You've got this. Just be honest and direct." With a deep breath, Tasha dialed the number Sarah had provided. The phone rang, each beep reverberating in her chest. Finally, a voice answered. "Hello? Hi, is this Tom?" "Tom Williams?" Tasha asked, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Yes, this is Tom," the voice replied. "Who's calling?" "My name is Tasha Lee. I was referred to you by Sarah Jenkins. I have some information that I believe you'll want to hear." "Go on," Tom said, his tone shifting to one of intrigue. Tasha swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on her. "I have documents that detail some serious safety violations linked to Leonard Price and his companies. I believe there's a cover-up related to several tragic accidents, including one that involved a personal friend of mine." There was a pause on the other end, and Tasha could almost hear the wheels turning in Tom's mind. "That's quite a claim. Can you tell me more?" Tasha took a deep breath, determined to share everything she could without revealing her identity or putting herself in danger. "I can't go into too much detail right now, but I can provide you with copies of the documents and any additional information you need. I just need to ensure my safety before I proceed." "Understood," Tom replied, his voice professional yet curious. "How about we meet in a public place where you feel comfortable? I want to make sure this information is treated with the seriousness it deserves." Tasha looked at Brenda, who nodded encouragingly. "That sounds good," Tasha said, her heart racing. "How about the cafe on 5th Street? It's a quiet place, and I can get there in 20 minutes. "Perfect. I'll see you there," Tom said, and they exchanged a few more details before hanging up. As Tasha set down her phone, a mixture of relief and panic surged through her. "I did it. I actually did it." Brenda grinned, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "That's amazing. You're one step closer to putting Leonard Price in his place." "Let's hope so," Tasha replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But it's only the beginning. We need to be careful." As they left the cafe, Tasha felt the weight of the world shift slightly off her shoulders. She had taken a crucial step toward justice, and with Brenda by her side, she felt less alone in the fight. But the looming specter of Leonard's wrath still hung overhead, and she knew that this battle was far from over. As she drove to the cafe on 5th Street, the streets blurred past her, each light and shadow reflecting the turmoil within. The air was electric with anticipation, tinged with a hint of fear. Tasha's heart raced as she parked and stepped out of her car, determination coursing through her veins. The cafe was quaint, with wooden tables and soft lighting that created a comfortable atmosphere. Tasha pushed open the door, the bell chiming softly as she entered. She spotted Tom sitting at a corner table, his notepad and pen ready, an air of professionalism surrounding him. "Mr. Williams?" She approached cautiously. "Ms. Lee," he replied, looking up with a warm smile. "Thank you for meeting me." Tasha took a seat, her heart pounding. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "I appreciate your willingness to share this information," Tom said, his demeanor serious. "I understand this is a sensitive situation." Tasha nodded, her resolve hardening. "It is. I have documents that detail Leonard Price's negligence, along with articles about the accidents linked to his businesses. I believe he has actively covered up these incidents to protect his reputation." Tom leaned in, his interest piqued. "This is significant. If what you're saying is true, it could have major implications." Tasha slid the thick manila envelope across the table to Tom Williams, the journalist's eyes widening as he took in the sheer volume of documents. The cafe's soft lighting cast long shadows across the table, amplifying the gravity of the moment. The hushed murmur of conversations around them faded into the background as Tom began to carefully sift through the papers, his brow furrowing with each new revelation. "This is damning," he finally said, his voice low, a mixture of disbelief and awe. He looked up at Tasha, his gaze intense. "You're putting yourself at considerable risk by bringing this to light." Tasha met his gaze, her own expression resolute. "I know the risks, but I can't stay silent. Too many lives have been ruined because of Leonard Price's greed." The memory of Sammy's infectious laugh, his bright future extinguished too soon, fueled her determination. Tom nodded, his expression hardening. "I understand. I'll do everything I can to make sure this story gets the attention it deserves." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "But I need to verify these documents, corroborate the information. It'll take time." Tasha's stomach clenched. Time. The one thing she didn't have. She knew Leonard Price wouldn't remain idle. He would be searching for the leak, tightening his grip on Crestview Manor, silencing anyone who posed a threat. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "A few days, maybe a week," Tom replied, his tone apologetic. "I need to be thorough. I need to make sure this story is airtight." Tasha nodded, trying to suppress the wave of anxiety that threatened to engulf her. A week felt like an eternity. "I understand. Just be careful. Price is a powerful man. He won't hesitate to retaliate." Tom's expression hardened. "Don't worry about me. I'm used to dealing with powerful people. I'll make sure this story gets out one way or another." They exchanged a few more words, solidifying their plan of communication, before Tasha left the cafe, the weight of her secret pressing down on her once more. The city lights blurred as she drove back to Crestview Manor, the looming shadow of Leonard Price hanging heavy in her mind. The nursing home seemed eerily quiet as she entered, the usual evening bustle replaced by a hushed stillness. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Something felt wrong. As she approached the nursing station, she saw Mrs. Henderson talking to two men in dark suits, their faces grim. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She recognized them. They were Leonard Price's lawyers. "Tasha!" Mrs. Henderson called out, her voice strained. "These gentlemen would like to speak with you." Tasha's blood ran cold. Had Leonard discovered her involvement? Had he already begun his retaliation? She forced herself to remain calm, her expression neutral as she approached the men. "Can I help you?" Ms. Lee, one of the lawyers said, his voice smooth and professional, yet laced with an underlying menace. We have reason to believe you've been accessing confidential documents belonging to Mr. Price. Tasha's mind raced. She couldn't deny it. They must have found the hidden compartment, realized the documents were missing. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, trying to maintain her composure. The lawyer's lips curled into a thin smile. Don't play coy, Ms. Lee. We have evidence. We know you've been snooping around in Mr. Price's personal belongings. Tasha's heart pounded against her ribs. She felt trapped, cornered. She glanced at Mrs. Henderson, who looked on with a mixture of concern and helplessness. I was just tidying up his room, Tasha said, her voice barely above a whisper. The lawyer's smile widened. Tidying up or stealing confidential documents? Tasha remained silent, her mind racing. She couldn't admit to anything. She had to protect herself, protect the story from being buried before it even had a chance to surface. Ms. Lee, the other lawyer said, his tone softer, yet no less threatening. We understand you're in a difficult position, but we can make this go away. Just return the documents and we'll forget this ever happened. Tasha's mind reeled. They were offering her a deal, a way out. But at what cost? Returning the documents meant betraying Sammy, betraying all the victims of Leonard Price's negligence. It meant allowing him to continue his reign of power, to continue silencing those who dared to challenge him. I don't have any documents, she said, her voice trembling. The lawyers exchanged a knowing glance. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Ms. Lee. We know you have them. Just give them back, and we'll all move on. Tasha's resolve hardened. She couldn't back down now. She had gone too far. She had to see this through, no matter the consequences. I have nothing to give you, she said, her voice gaining strength. The lawyer's expressions hardened. Very well, Ms. Lee. You've made your choice. They turned and walked away, their footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet hallway. Tasha watched them go, her heart pounding, a mixture of fear and defiance coursing through her veins. She knew she had just crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Mrs. Henderson approached her, her face etched with worry. Tasha, what was that about? Tasha took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. I don't know. They just accused me of stealing something, but I didn't take anything. Mrs. Henderson's brow furrowed. Be careful, Tasha. Mr. Price is not someone you want to cross. Tasha nodded, her mind racing. She knew the danger she was in, but she couldn't let fear paralyze her. She had to stay strong, stay focused on her goal. She excused herself and headed to the break room, needing a moment to gather her thoughts, to process the confrontation with Leonard's lawyers. The weight of her secret felt heavier than ever, the walls of Crestview Manor closing in around her, suffocating her with their gilded elegance. As she sat alone in the break room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Tasha's mind raced. She knew she had to act quickly. She had to find a way to protect herself, to protect the story from being buried before it could even see the light of day. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed Tom Williams's number. She needed to warn him, to let him know that Leonard Price was onto them. The phone rang, each beep echoing the urgency of the situation. Finally, Tom answered. Hello? Tom, it's Tasha, she said, her voice hushed, filled with a sense of urgency. Price knows. He sent his lawyers to question me. They accused me of stealing his documents. There was a pause on the other end, a moment of stunned silence. Are you okay? Tom finally asked, his voice laced with concern. I'm fine, Tasha replied, though her heart was racing. But we need to be careful. He's on to us. I understand. Tom's voice was tight, the casual reporter's tone replaced with a grim seriousness. This changes things. We need to move quickly. Tasha's hand tightened around the phone. What do you mean? I'll start working on the story immediately, Tom explained, his words clipped and efficient. I'll contact my sources, start digging for corroborating evidence. We need to get this out there before Price can bury it. A wave of relief washed over Tasha. Despite the increased danger, knowing Tom was taking action, that the story was finally gaining momentum, gave her a flicker of hope. Thank you, Tom. Just be careful. You too, Tasha, Tom replied. Stay under the radar. Don't do anything that might draw attention to yourself. They hung up, and Tasha sat in the sterile silence of the break room, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She knew she was walking a dangerous path, but she couldn't turn back. She had to see this through, for Sammy, for all the victims of Leonard Price's greed. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Tasha went through the motions at Crestview Manor, caring for her patients, maintaining a facade of normalcy, while inside, a storm raged. She felt Leonard Price's unseen presence everywhere, a suffocating weight that pressed down on her, making every interaction, every conversation, feel strained and artificial. She avoided Leonard's wing of the nursing home, her heart pounding whenever she passed by his door. She imagined him inside, plotting his revenge, his eyes cold and calculating. The fear was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to her, reminding her of the danger she was in. Brenda became her lifeline, her confidant, her rock in the turbulent sea of uncertainty. They met in hushed corners of the nursing home, exchanging worried glances, sharing whispered updates, clinging to the hope that justice would prevail. Have you heard from Tom? Brenda asked one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper, as they huddled in the dimly lit supply closet. Tasha shook her head, her stomach twisting with anxiety. It had been 3 days since she'd spoken to Tom. 3 days of agonizing silence. Not a word. I'm starting to get worried. Brenda squeezed her hand reassuringly. He'll contact you. He's probably just being careful. But Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence was too heavy, too ominous. She couldn't escape the nagging fear that Leonard Price had somehow silenced Tom, that the story would never see the light of day. That evening, as Tasha was preparing to leave Crestview Manor, Mrs. Henderson called her into her office. Tasha's heart sank. She knew this couldn't be good. Tasha, please sit down, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice grave. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk, her expression a mixture of concern and sadness. Tasha sat, her hands clammy, her heart pounding against her ribs. She braced herself for the inevitable. I'm afraid I have some bad news, Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice trembling slightly. There's been an incident. Mr. Price, he's passed away. Tasha's mind reeled. Leonard Price was dead? How? It couldn't be a coincidence. Not after everything that had happened. How? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. It appears to have been a heart attack, Mrs. Henderson replied, her eyes filled with sadness. It was sudden. He was in his room, reading, when it happened. Tasha's mind raced. A heart attack? Was it natural? Or had someone helped it along? She couldn't shake the feeling that Leonard Price's death was somehow connected to the documents, to her decision to expose his secrets. I'm so sorry, Tasha stammered, her mind still struggling to process the news. Mrs. Henderson nodded, her expression weary. It's a shock to us all. He was a complex man, but he will be missed. Tasha left Mrs. Henderson's office, her mind in turmoil. Leonard Price's death changed everything. Would the story still come out? Would anyone believe it now that he was gone? As she drove home that night, the city lights seemed to mock her, their brightness a stark contrast to the darkness that consumed her. She felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The next morning, Tasha's phone rang. It was Tom Williams. "Tasha, have you heard?" he asked, his voice urgent. "About Mr. Price," Tasha replied, her heart sinking. "Yes," Tom said. "It changes everything. I'm pulling the story." Tasha's blood ran cold. "What? Why?" "It's too risky now," Tom explained. "With Price gone, there's no way to prove his involvement. It'll just be a smear campaign against a dead man. My editor won't run it." Tasha felt a wave of despair wash over her. All that work, all that risk, for nothing. Leonard Price had escaped justice, even in death. "But the documents," she stammered, her voice filled with desperation. "They prove everything." "I know," Tom replied, his tone apologetic. "But without Price to corroborate the information, they're just paper. I'm sorry, Tasha. I really am." They hung up, and Tasha sat in stunned silence, the weight of her failure crushing her. She had tried to do the right thing, but in the end, it hadn't mattered. Leonard Price had won. Just as she was about to succumb to despair, another call came in. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered tentatively. "Ms. Lee?" a voice said, sharp and official. "This is Detective Reynolds from the City Police Department. We'd like to ask you some questions about the death of Leonard Price." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. The police? What did they want with her? "What's this about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We've received some information that suggests Mr. Price's death may not have been natural," Detective Reynolds explained. "We understand you are one of his nurses. We'd like to speak with you about his routine, his health, anything that might be relevant to the investigation." Tasha's mind reeled. Not natural? Did that mean murder? And what information had the police received? Could it be? Suddenly, a chilling thought struck her. The nursing home. Crestview Manor. Leonard Price had been funding it, using it as a shield to protect his secrets. But what if the nursing home itself was implicated in his death? "Detective," Tasha said, her voice gaining a newfound strength. "I think I have some information that might be helpful to your investigation." A flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe, just maybe, justice wasn't lost after all. Maybe Leonard Price's death wouldn't be the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where the truth would finally be revealed, and those responsible would be held accountable. The game, it seemed, was far from over, and Tasha Lee, the quiet, compassionate nurse, was about to become a key player in unraveling the tangled web of secrets and lies that surrounded Crestview Manor. Tasha Lee felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through her body as she hung up the phone with Detective Reynolds. This was her chance, the opportunity she had been waiting for. She could finally take a stand against Leonard Price, even in death. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. She had been afraid of the repercussions of her actions, but now she felt a sense of purpose driving her forward. After a quick change of clothes, Tasha made her way to the police station. The streets were busy, but her mind was laser-focused. The city around her faded into the background as she replayed every detail she had learned about Leonard Price and the nursing home. She needed to be clear and concise to ensure that every piece of information she provided would aid the investigation. Upon arriving at the station, she was ushered into a small interview room. The walls were bare, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare over the metal table and plastic chairs. Detective Reynolds entered a few moments later, a man in his late 40s with an air of authority that immediately put her on edge. He sat across from her, his gaze steady. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Lee," he said, his tone professional yet compassionate. "I understand this must be difficult for you." Tasha nodded, her heart racing. "I need to tell you everything I know about Leonard Price and the nursing home." "Please do," he encouraged, pulling out a notepad and pen. Taking a deep breath, Tasha began recounting her discovery of the hidden documents, the negligence tied to Price's businesses, and her friend Sammy's tragic death in one of his factories. She explained how she had worked to gather evidence and how she had recently contacted a journalist to expose him. "Why did you wait until now to come forward?" Detective Reynolds asked, his pen poised above the notepad. "I was afraid. Price had his lawyers intimidate me. I thought I was going to lose everything if I spoke up," Tasha admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "But when I learned he had died, I realized this was my chance to ensure his secrets didn't die with him." Detective Reynolds nodded, taking notes. "And you believe his death was not natural?" "I do. There were too many coincidences. His health had been declining, but I can't shake the feeling that someone might have had a hand in it," Tasha replied, her heart pounding as she recalled the pressure she felt in the days leading up to his death. "How do you think the nursing home fits into this?" the detective pressed. Mr. Price was known to manipulate situations to his advantage. He had been using Crestview Manor as a shield to protect himself from scrutiny. If there were any irregularities in his care or the care of his residents, it would be swept under the rug, Tasha explained, her conviction growing stronger with each word. Detective Reynolds listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "Do you have any evidence to support your theory?" Tasha hesitated for a moment. "I have the documents I copied. They detail the safety violations and accidents linked to Price's businesses. If we can dig further, I believe we can uncover a pattern of negligence that could lead to criminal charges." "Good," he said, scribbling furiously in his notebook. "We'll need to see those documents, and if you're willing, we may also want to talk to your colleagues at Crestview Manor. They might have insights we're not aware of." "I'll do whatever it takes," Tasha replied, her resolve firm. Over the next hour, Tasha shared everything she could. Detective Reynolds asked questions, probing deeper into her experiences and the dynamics at Crestview Manor. As she spoke, Tasha felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She was finally able to reveal the truth, to hold someone accountable for the injustice that had haunted her for so long. When their conversation ended, Detective Reynolds stood and extended his hand. "Thank you, Ms. Lee. Your courage in coming forward is commendable. We'll investigate this thoroughly and I'll keep you updated on any developments. Tasha left the police station feeling a mix of hope and anxiety. She knew she had done the right thing, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead still loomed large. As she drove back to Crestview Manor, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The quiet hum of the city felt oppressive, and each stoplight seemed to stretch into eternity. When she arrived at the nursing home, Tasha found Brenda waiting for her outside. "How did it go?" Brenda asked, her eyes filled with concern. "I told them everything," Tasha replied, her voice steady. "They're going to investigate. They think Price's death might not have been natural." Brenda's eyes widened. "That's huge. What now?" "Now, we need to prepare for the fallout," Tasha said, her heart racing. Price had a lot of powerful connections, and I don't know how they'll react to this. They exchanged worried glances, both aware of the potential consequences. But Tasha felt a sense of empowerment as well. She had taken a stand, and she wouldn't back down. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at Crestview Manor shifted. Whispers circulated among the staff, and the tension was palpable. Tasha and Brenda worked quietly, their conversations filled with urgency and concern. They were acutely aware of the eyes that seemed to follow them, the subtle glances exchanged among staff and residents alike. Then, a few days later, Tasha received a call from Detective Reynolds. "Ms. Lee, we have a development in the investigation," he said, his tone serious. "What did you find?" Tasha asked, holding her breath. "We conducted a thorough review of Mr. Price's medical records and spoke with several staff members at Crestview Manor," the detective explained. "We discovered discrepancies in his treatment, medications that were improperly administered, records that had been altered. It points to negligence, and we're looking into possible foul play as well." Tasha felt a rush of relief mixed with fear. "Are you saying someone might have intentionally harmed him?" "We're not ruling anything out at this point," Detective Reynolds replied. "We'll need your cooperation to gather more information from your colleagues. The investigation is ongoing, but we're pursuing several leads." "I'm willing to help in any way I can," Tasha said, her heart racing. "I just want to make sure that the truth comes out." As the investigation unfolded, Tasha found herself becoming more involved than she had expected. Detective Reynolds and his team began interviewing staff at Crestview Manor, and Tasha was often called in to provide context or corroborate information. With each interview, the web of deceit surrounding Leonard Price began to unravel. The nursing home's management was under intense scrutiny. Tasha watched as the tension grew, and she could sense the unease among the staff. Some were supportive of her, while others whispered behind her back, fearful of the repercussions of speaking out against such a powerful figure, even in death. As weeks passed, the media caught wind of the investigation. Reports began to surface about Leonard Price's legacy, his businesses, the accidents, the negligence. Tasha's heart raced every time she saw the headlines, each one a reminder of the power of the truth. She knew she had made the right choice, but the fear of retaliation still lingered. One afternoon, as Tasha was finishing her shift, she overheard a hushed conversation between two of the nursing home's upper management staff. "We can't let this continue," one of them said, his voice low and urgent. "Price had connections everywhere. If this goes public, we'll all be implicated." Tasha's heart sank. They were talking about covering up the truth, about silencing anyone who dared to speak out. She felt a surge of anger. They couldn't be allowed to hide behind Leonard's death. She had to act before it was too late. That evening, Tasha reached out to Detective Reynolds. "I overheard something today," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. "They're planning to cover this up. I think they're trying to silence anyone who speaks out." "Thank you for letting me know," Reynolds replied, his tone serious. "We need to gather evidence of this. If they're trying to intimidate staff, it could strengthen our case." Over the next few days, Tasha documented everything she could. Conversations, incidents, any sign that the nursing home's management was attempting to bury the truth. She shared her findings with Detective Reynolds, who promised to keep her informed of any developments. Then, the moment Tasha had been waiting for arrived. The local news station aired a special report on the investigation into Leonard Price's death and the allegations of negligence surrounding his businesses. The story gained traction, and suddenly, Tasha found herself at the center of a media storm. Reporters began showing up at Crestview Manor, interviewing staff, residents, and anyone who had been connected to Price. Tasha felt a mix of anxiety and exhilaration as she watched the story unfold. The truth was finally coming to light, and Leonard Price's power was beginning to crumble. But with the media attention came new challenges. Tasha received threatening messages, anonymous notes, warning her to stay silent. She felt the walls closing in again, and fear gnawed at her insides. As much as she longed for justice, she was terrified of the repercussions. One night, as she was leaving the nursing home, Tasha noticed a shadowy figure lurking near her car. Her heart raced as she approached, adrenaline coursing through her veins. To her surprise, it was Brenda. "Tasha, I was waiting for you," Brenda said, her voice urgent. "I'm worried about you." "I'm okay," Tasha replied, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. "But we need to talk about what's happening. This isn't just about Leonard anymore. It's about all of us." In the following weeks, the investigation intensified, leading to multiple arrests among the nursing home's management for their role in the cover-up. Tasha and Brenda became advocates for the residents, ensuring their voices were heard and their stories were told. As the dust settled, Tasha felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced her fears and fought for justice. Sammy's memory was honored, and for the first time in a long while, she felt free. With a newfound purpose, Tasha stepped out of Crestview Manor with Brenda by her side, ready to embrace whatever came next. You've made it to the end. If you enjoyed this story, I am confident that you'll love the next one appearing on the screen now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and please give this video a like. I'll see you in the next one.